Hey everybody, Joe here, Raven 360. Had an awesome conversation today with Danielle Campbell from Adobe. She really was, well, number one, she made me laugh probably harder than I ever have on our podcast. So I hope you'll enjoy some of the stories she told. And we spoke about, the value of certifications, the value of brand loyalty for learning, how to talk to executive leadership around the value of training and customer education. And I think you'll certainly learn some things about customer education and what's happening in the world in that area. And also, hopefully, have a few laughs. So please enjoy and contact me anytime. Please subscribe and like and comment, and happy to answer your questions and engage. Thanks very much. Hi, thanks for joining another edition of the Raven 360 Training-Led Growth Podcast. I have an awesome guest with me today. Super excited for our conversation. Danielle Campbell, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate your time. I know we're going to have a lot of interesting discussion based on your experience, which has been really incredible. So let me just introduce Danielle, a little bit of your background. So currently at Adobe, and the head of global learning strategy. So we're going to get into that because I think that's an awesome bit of experience just there. But started your career back actually with the American Cancer Society, which I actually want to talk about. We'll start, but then gone into some consulting work, and then got into some really kind of what I would consider kind of premier software and learning experience with SAP, then with Lawson, Red Hat, Hortonworks, Plex, also a really big participator and leader president of the board of directors at CEdMA, which is the Customer Education Management Association, which is a huge part of what I want to talk to you about in general.
Okay.
Customer education in general, what we're going to talk about, which has led you all the way to Adobe. So really incredible amount of experience. So just kind of to dig in just out of the gate. So you went from out of school to the American Cancer Society, then in technology. Just talk us through a little bit of the experience. How did you get started? How did the career take off?
Sure. Yeah. I started I did my degree in health administration. So I wanted to change the face of healthcare as we knew it. So I graduated college, and the economy was terrible when I graduated. So I actually waitressed for 8 months. Yeah. And then I found the job at the American Cancer Society. And I think what happened is they said, oh, you're 22, you're young, you know SPSS. We're going to give you a computer. Now, I graduated college in 1995, not to give my age away. And I had not actually worked on a computer, nor had I done any email or internet or anything like that at that time. And they said, oh, you must know this stuff. And they plopped me down in front of a computer, data, stats, all that sort of stuff. But more importantly, they were implementing the 1-800-ACS-2345 at the time and ACS.org. So it was the first time that ACS was doing a website. And I was part of the committee and went to the ad agency, DDB Needham here in Chicago, saw the pitch, saw the whole thing, and was involved in that. And then they said, since we're putting this all online in a Lotus Notes database, we want you to drive around the state of Illinois and teach all of the volunteers and all the local offices how to use Lotus Notes. So I actually went around and taught them how to play solitaire so that they could get the mouse skills down, and then taught them about the benefit of having the online WIG database and donor information and second referral. And so they were getting out of big binders and into an online system. And for me, I didn't realize you could have a career in training, and it just opened up a whole world. So the company that we hired to implement the Lotus Notes database recruited me as a trainer. And that was the beginning of my technical training career. So I went from there to from a consulting group to business objects, where I did every single job you could think of in customer education, from, a road warrior for 6 years as an instructor to business development, training, sales, curriculum development. And then I finished my career there just about a year before a year after the SAP acquisition, leading the Americas business. So I went through the Crystal acquisition, huge team. It was a lot of fun. and got a chance to do every job possible in customer education. And I've been stuck in this world as a career ever since. So it's been a joy.
Well, come on, stuck in this world, this is
no, I don't, I would never leave it. I love it. I'm a total geek about training.
Well, it's so interesting. You just said, I think one of the one of the most interesting things you just said is when you were we graduated college right around the exact same time, right? So we don't have to talk about ages. But and I too, by the way, when I started I started in technology and software right out of college. I graduated economics, and I didn't know what to do. Moved to Boston, and a startup was hiring, and I didn't, when we started we were a software development consulting company. We had no internet. We had no email. We didn't have email or internet when we first started, which it's like I tell people that work for me now, and they're like, what? How's that even? How can you? I know. So anyways, I totally understand. But something you said, which is so interesting, is that you were teaching people a system using solitaire on how to use the mouse.
Yeah.
Talk about gamification.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like people, it's like this like buzzword we all talk about learning now, like, oh, gamify it and make it interesting and like teach through gaming. It's like you were actually doing it back then.
Well, it was generally an older population that volunteered in the regional offices. I worked for the state of Illinois division of ACS. And when I was, teaching mouse skills, they were picking it up like a TV remote control. So the point and click concept, the only way for them to connect that, hand-eye coordination was to play solitaire. So that's what I figured out.
The visual of that is so funny though.
It's true. The wired mouse, like picking it up. I'm like, oh no, we got to leave it on the desk. It was hilarious. Really cool experience.
Oh my goodness. And it's funny now you go to like, we're all in these Zoom meetings now. And it's like, you get on the Zoom with your grandparents and they're like,
I know.
You're like looking at their ear. You're like, wait.
I know.
You're like, no,
I usually get like the ziggy shot. Yeah.
It's like pointing the mouse at the TV is so funny. That's too much.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, that was thank you for that laugh early on this Monday morning.
There you go.
So you saw some incredible stuff though. So business objects is interesting. So business objects acquired by SAP, primarily you've been part of the customer education side, which I think is which is why I love talking to you, because to me, as I mentioned, it's the training-led growth podcast. And to me, that's really about the customer. It's about educating the customer about using technology, having a great experience with technology. And our belief has always been, if you have someone that has a great experience learning, really learns the technology well, they become happier. They're happier users. And then they, ultimately buy more from the company that they're having a good experience with. But let's talk about this. So from when you started, business objects and SAP. And by the way, I also started my career back in SAP as well. SAP consulting and implementations. Okay. That's what we did. Yeah. So writing, ABAP code and super long implementations and blah, blah, blah. But talk to me about your experience and what has changed from back then, primarily instructor, face-to-face, instructor-led training. You were an instructor, curriculum developer. What have you seen just broadly? What have you seen change from back then to the kind of the way you do things now with Adobe?
Yeah, I would say, I'd love to say there's been mass change, but in some cases there isn't that much change other than we've adopted the ability to do things remotely and the ability to learn offline and the ability to take learning in small bite-sized chunks, which everybody, we joke about people having the attention span of a goldfish these days and that need to get information immediately. They don't want to wait 2 weeks or a month for a class. But when you think about all the ways you can learn, there's really not a lot of new ways to learn. There's new ways to compile learning and new ways to deliver learning that meets today's needs. But we still see, even at Adobe, a large portion of our business is still instructor-led. Now it's virtual instructor-led, of course. And then that's going to fluctuate by region. But I think people still crave the connection. And now we're all figuring out in this new paradigm, how do we do that same level of connection virtually, which with everyone working at home currently, for the most part, those that can, they're starting to learn that this can be also an engaging experience, right? So I think the shifts have been based on the economy, based on the market. Certainly the growth of subscription-based learning and the ability to consume content as you need it and have that 1-year access was a big growth. We certainly didn't have subscriptions back in the day at Business Objects. It was all instructor-led events, on-sites, and public classes. So that evolution, I think, has happened. Learning choice, I think, is the biggest evolution that I see.
Yeah, I've had a number of conversations, and I liked what you said about we still need some connection. And we hear about this more than ever. It's like, gosh, we're a little bit stuck in our homes here. Let's hope not too much longer.
Yeah.
I think we're all getting a little stir crazy, but the connection I think is important. And we've found, and I've talked to some other leaders like you on this topic in other regions, Europe or EMEA, Asia Pacific, have definitely leaned more heavily towards face-to-face and instructor-led training.
Yes.
And I think there's been hesitancy towards virtual and remote. And that obviously that's shifted now. In the US, I think was a little ahead of the curve on embracing subscription or embracing kind of remote and on demand. And I think it's a cultural thing to some extent.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
The connection I think is important. Do you think this is going to be like a long-term shift towards remote and virtual, or do you think people are going to start to or want to hedge back to face-to-face and
I think it's a long-term shift collectively, right? I think even the work from home, I hear lots of companies evaluating, do they need such a big, footprint of office space? Can people do what they need? I would say you're getting a lot more productivity out of your employees who are not commuting 2 hours, let's say in the Bay Area, right? Adobe's headquarters are right smack in the middle of San Jose. And a lot of my colleagues spent 2 hours going to work and 2 hours going home. And now they're waking up and logging on. The productivity is high, right? I think for this to be a long-term viable option, we definitely are all evaluating the duration of training, right? Can we take training and do it in 2-hour chunks over the course of 2 weeks versus a full-blown 8-hour session? People don't have the attention or the time to do that right now, especially if you have your family at home and you don't have you're doing remote schooling, which I'm doing with my children.
Yeah.
So a lot of that kind of stuff, I do think it's for the long term. And I think the more learning professionals we can do to create that feeling that I can get the training whenever I need it, it's that we're all in that position where there's urgency, right? There's urgency to go pivot your business, to fix a business problem, especially in the line of business that I'm in. So the Adobe Experience Cloud, it's digital transformation. Everybody out there in the world is looking at how to digitally transform businesses. And so if we're not at the ready with training that meets that need today in the moment, then we're going to lose the opportunity to, gray market or a competitor. And so, yeah, as a learning professional, I believe we have to think about that. And to your point, Joe, about APAC and EMEA making that evolution, I have a colleague in EMEA he's chunking the learning down into small 2-hour sessions and calling them accelerator sessions. And it's great thinking, right? And it meets today's schedule for everybody, but it also is allowing us to test the market with these shorter live sessions to keep the connectivity, which is absolutely cultural in both of those regions, and to then meet the needs of people who have a very limited, time schedule based on what they need to do. So I think everybody's experimenting, which is great, but I do see this here for the long term for sure.
So let me talk about that. I get asked this all the time, not only about length of content, but just like, how do I create content? So from everything from you being an instructional designer to you teaching people not how to point a mouse at a screen. That still cracks me up. That's an amazing story. Give me some recommendations for the listeners in the audience. How do you create content? How do you think about, or how do your teams now think about creating content that's digestible, that's the best?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that we're all working on collectively. Adobe has a very, what we would call federated type of learning organization. So there is no centralized learning department. And so we work together collaboratively across all of the different, product business unit, the worldwide field readiness, which is both sales and technical enablement, and then our customer education team. And so as a side effect of that, there's many, many audiences being served by the content. So everybody's thinking about this. And one of the ways is really, also being from a company that has a product to deliver virtual sessions, right, with Adobe Connect, is looking at, do we fully employ all of the features that are in those, right? Are we using the hand raising feature? Are we doing things like stopping the learning at a certain point to take a poll, right? Mm-hmm. Some of the most engaging, I have a woman on my team who does internal services sales enablement, and she does a phenomenal job at doing these really fun, unrelated polls to create empathy, to create learner connection. And so it's a new skill. And we're thinking about, how do we retool our instructors to read a digital room, right? It's very different when you're at a physical location and you can see the person checking their phone or, tuning out, versus a digital environment where I could turn my camera off and pretend I'm listening and do my email. Or, so to your point, that really sort of short, engaged session, everybody's participation, showing the participation, and then getting that validation through either digital polls or just the verbal, nonverbal feedback face to face, or unmuting everybody. So it's taking some new delivery changes, and as a side effect, that impacts instructional design. So we're thinking about, can we put notes in the curriculum for instructors that say, now is a good time to have this poll, or now is a good time to engage with the team, or check in on your learners. But I think one of the big things we're really, really looking at is, do we have enough interactivity, right? Are the lab environments useful enough? Are they getting that hands-on feeling? Mm-hmm. Can I overtake your screen if you're having problems and lagging behind? And then how do I manage that virtual classroom, right? How do I do it so that I'm not missing the chats and things? So asking ourselves questions, does it take an instructor and a moderator for this to work well? And how does that change our delivery paradigm as well? So there's lots and lots of questions swirling around. Some of it's trial and error. Some of it works on some audiences, like deeply technical audiences. They don't tend to like the gimmicky sort of like, how's everybody feeling today? They want to get into the code. They want to see the code. So I think it's a mental shift for all of us to think about the end learner, the delivery medium, and then what we're doing to keep them engaged. But definitely small chunks. I agree with you on that 100%.
It's the worst when you're in a session and you're trying to give some learning and it's like crickets, like dead air. Yeah. It's so frustrating. It's like, if there's one thing we can try to promote to people, if you're in a virtual instructor-led session, let's try to participate, right?
Yeah.
Try to give some feedback.
Help a person out.
Help us out. Give the instructor something. That's our PSA for today. Help them help you.
Blink.
Something, anything. So let's just talk about that for a second. So you can, when you're in a virtual and it's instructor-led, you can give a poll, you can do some, I don't know that people like live quizzing. I don't think anybody likes that, but trying to figure out, are people learning it? I love the recommendations that you had, pausing, building it into the curriculum, like super good tips on that stuff. When you're doing a subscription or totally self-paced, how do you do that? And is it important?
I think it is so I see that more on the gamification realm, right? What badges and social clout can I achieve by working my way through learning? And you and I both know, as probably a lot of your listeners do, that ability to put something on your LinkedIn profile, I'm an expert in X, or the ability to be socially recognized by your peers. Adobe has a platform called Experience League, which is all self-paced, and it's very much tied to the Adobe communities, which is great. And the idea is that as you're going through your learning, you would be able to be co-recognized in the communities that you're participating in. So it's like, oh, there's Joe. He's an analytics expert. I want to connect with Joe. I want to talk to Joe. Joe knows his stuff. So I think it's a different type of acknowledgement. So if you're motivated by getting to the next level and leveling up and getting the visual recognition with a badge or some sort of thumbs up or social clout in whatever platform you're working in for that particular company, then those I think are motivators. The other big one, of course, is actual accreditation and certification. So I've heard across the board, both in CEdMA and TSIA, I just joined their advisory board as well. The surge for certification in this climate is huge, right? People are reporting record numbers of learners coming and finally finishing certification or doing all of the prep and tutorials that it takes to complete their certification. So skills acquisition in a down economy is huge as well. So anything that we can do to validate those skills, and what a colleague of mine says is make it resume impactful, right? What happens when this is all done and I want to go out and either, join a new company, or if I've been furloughed, prove that I actually have the talents and skills to do this. I want that physical, digital symbol that I've achieved that. So that's where I see the online type stuff. Really, you've got to have a way to recognize that the learner is working their way through a path or a cert. You know what I mean?
Skills acquisition in a down economy and certifications being way up. That's something. Let's talk about that. Goodness, I think technology, we've been fairly fortunate in this period. There's a lot of technology companies that are not doing great.
Yep.
There's layoffs and there's people, unfortunately, that are looking for work. And I totally agree that now, if you can build knowledge, if you can build technology capability, if you can build skills that are going to help you kind of look for that next opportunity, you're right. I hadn't really actually thought about it, but that's like a great time to be doing it right now as a differentiator. So I think personally, as somebody who's going to look for work down the road, I think that's like so important. And
yeah,
I feel like the big leaders in technology do a pretty good job of this. Adobe, AWS, Microsoft, Cisco. But I think a lot of earlier stage technology companies don't value certifications or don't value that engaging learning as much. So I'm glad to hear you say that, because we talk to a lot of earlier stage companies. I even talk to later stage companies that haven't stood up these certification experiences or the ability for users to get certified. And our belief is your belief, I think, is that certification is actually strategic for technology.
Yeah.
Maybe explain that a little bit as some of your experience. Why is it important? Not only for the learner. We know it's important for the learner because it can help them upskill their career, get new job, new opportunity. Why is it important for the company?
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons, and I think benefited from working at Red Hat for this to really solidify. I should have mentioned Red Hat, one of the early adopters, and I think one of the better certification programs in place. So I should have mentioned. Absolutely.
Sorry.
And oh no, not at all. And I'm just using that as an example of where I feel like that's where I was completely enlightened to the benefits of certification, because you have an open source company in that perspective, right? So when I joined Red Hat, they had just come out of a cycle where the only thing that was making money, and this is a true statement, was training and t-shirts, because people were so loyal to the brand. Like, people loved Red Hat swag, right? Loyalist group of people I've ever worked with, and customer base. And really what companies like that and other companies, Microsoft, Cisco, all of the other big certification vendors over the years, and even when I was at Hortonworks, when we turned certification on, it was for a couple of reasons. One is to create brand loyalty, right? So you want a learner who, wherever they go, as they progress through their career from, an employee, an individual contributor, to potentially a team manager, to a buyer, a decision maker, that they're so capable in your technology and they've got the certification to prove it, that not only do they continue that with their teams, but they make your choice, your software, their choice every single time, right? So one of our VP of marketing for the Experience Cloud said this really, really well recently. And her name is Sarah Kennedy. And she said, we are in the business of making CEOs, helping them do career making decisions. So, in a digital experience world, if Adobe, for example, Experience Cloud is the way that a company is going to transform their business, we have an obligation to help those people make career making decisions. And so I see that with certification significantly, even accreditation. And I've worked across multiple spectrums, from Linux to big data to, BI, you name it, ERP software, ERP manufacturing software, and now, of course, digital marketing, digital experience transformation. And what I see in each different market is, there's pure tech certification, which is pure skills validation. I can do the job. And what Red Hat did really well was very early on was performance-based testing, actually remote proctoring, like really progressive stuff at the time. They do a great job with that still. To where I am today, which is we have an obligation not just to teach our technology, but to teach someone how to be a digital marketer, right? So we have lots of conversations internally about, is that on us? Do they go to a marketing organization? Should we, as a leading vendor in the digital marketing space, be teaching people how to be digital marketers? And so as a side effect, we have academic institutions wanting to partner with us, that we have career seeker level people coming to us and saying, help me to get a job in this market. And then you've got the deep technology. So there's a progression, but it's all about building your brand loyalty. It's about that people evangelizing your product wherever they go, being proud users of it. And I think as software vendors, we have an obligation to recognize those loyal fans and to elevate them in the community, right? We have some great champion programs at Adobe that gives people a speaking platform that recognizes them. They win awards. Red Hat did something very similar, RHC of the year, et cetera. Really good programs, but it keeps those people loyal. And when they turn into buyers, they're buying your software,
And have you found executive leadership at these technology companies get that? Do they understand that? Do they see that as strategic?
Some do and some don't. I would say, in my 20 plus career, it's been a mixed bag. It depends on what company I'm at. It depends on which leader. I've been at companies where they didn't believe it and a leader came in who absolutely believed it. And then you saw huge support behind any efforts that were trying to be put in place. So I think it's very situational.
So what do you think the gap is? How do we prove as customer education kind of thought leaders? How do we prove, or is it analytics? Is it data? Is it reporting? How do you do that? Have you thought about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it is stuff that you yourself talk about, Joe, is making that connection between, at the end of the day, a trained customer is more valuable to the company because they're typically, calling support less. So there's less of a financial burden to support the customer. They're usually cross-selling and buying more pieces of your software. So they're turning on more and more features and expanding. And more importantly, they're a customer base that is at the long term leading to renewals, especially in our SaaS world, right? Less attrition in an organization or type of software where it's easy to switch. Keeping those people engaged, causes the attrition rates to go down. Which, as a learning leader, I think a lot of us have worked very hard to pivot away from the old traditional smile sheets and I trained this many customers. And what I've found in leadership positions, especially in executive leadership positions, I have not yet found a peer at the table in another executive position who actually cares about whether or not you got a 4 or 5 on a customer, satisfaction score. But as soon as I tell them, by the way, sales, coworker, a trained customer buys 4x more software, they're like, oh, let me listen, let me help me understand that more, or a trained customer is more likely to recommend, or NPS scores are up, or they renew, or whatever that meaningful metric is to your company. I really feel like it's important to show the data in meaningful terms to your peers at the table. But ultimately, my firm belief, and I say this all the time, is as a learning leader, I'm here to help the company acquire more customers and sell more software. I'm not here to train a bunch of people. That is certainly how we're going to help with the acquisition. But at the end of the day, I work at a software company, and our goal is to have as many users of our software as humanly possible to help them solve their business problems. And if I can't do that as a learning leader, then I'm not doing a good job. That's how I feel about it.
Oh, I love amen. Yes. Yes. How do we do more of that? Acquire more customers. What did you say? Acquire more customers and sell more software.
Yep.
That's it, right? And by the way, hilarious. You said the training and t-shirts. That's the profitable thing. I mean, that's
it was an open source
that's so
company,
funny.
right? Yeah, it was fascinating. That was a great place to work. It was a fascinating model.
Training and t-shirts. We can make a t-shirt that says that. Let's tell some swag about this podcast. Training and t-shirts. Right. We're going to be powerful. I mean, but seriously, calling support less. Yeah, we do that, but like 4x a well-trained customer who's a happy customer buys 4x more software.
Yeah.
If you sell technology on a subscription model, recurring revenue, which we all do now.
Yeah.
You better be giving them a great experience, getting people trained, getting them certified. And then as learning and training responsible leaders, let's get better data. Like you said, let's show the data. So when you go to sales or marketing or a CEO, you can say like, hey, wait a minute. I have incredibly compelling data here that shows, a well-trained customer is loyal. They buy more.
Yep. Absolutely.
So absolutely. I thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
Well, and I learned that very early on. I have to give credit to Dan Klein, who was a mentor of mine. I mean, back in 2000, he had us all looking at how to pivot the conversation. He had come from PeopleSoft to Business Objects and was a new leader. And he did the study even before, and we were working at a BI company, but even before it was really easy to get that data, but he did the study, he did the work with us around the lower amount of support calls and the more software that they bought and, the way that they behaved. And this was pre-subscription. This was on-prem license model software. But he helped open my eyes and anyone that was on that team. This was in 2000 around that model. It's like, you have to have a business conversation. So if you're still, and with all due respect to all of our peers in the learning industry, if you're still running around talking about how great your courses are, if you can't make that connection back to the business, back to the dial that it moves, back to renewals, back to those types of things that are really meaningful, if you show a trained customer versus an untrained customer and the revenue that they generate for the company, that is what it's all about. That's how you get a seat at the table, in my mind. That's what my experience has been. That's when people stand up and go, oh, this person knows the business that we're in and they're here to support our business versus... I trained 20 people last week. It's a different story. I'm sure you could agree.
Yeah. Dan Klein. That's a nice plug for Dan back in early 2000. That's a thought leader in that space. I actually spoke with a kind of a really thought leader who as well, Tom Clancy, who's at UiPath now. And same thing. I mean, his famous metric study that he did at EMC was he found that when a customer buys $1 worth of training, they go on to spend $12 in additional product.
Absolutely.
And he brought that metric. It's a funny story. He brought that metric to the sales leader at EMC at the time. And they were like, well, whoa, let's give it all away.
Oh, no.
That was right. So I wanted to ask you about that. So first question, have you been part of a learning organization that did not charge, that did give it all away? Have you ever been a part of one?
No, not 100%. I've been in the hybrid, give some away. I'm our Adobe model is we have a huge library of free content through Experience League that actually lives in the product business unit. We are partnered with them, and then we have the sort of free to paid journey. So we can see both of it. I don't know. I have a probably controversial opinion about it. I don't think that people take 100% free training very seriously. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you an example of it.
I agree with you. I don't think that's controversial. I think that we actually think we have the data to prove that, but keep going.
Yeah, you're right. So from a data perspective, as a COVID response, a lot of companies, a lot of our peers, even our own company has done a significant amount of giving away what was chargeable training, typically on demand. So we have a whole library of on-demand content that we've given away. Huge surge of people signed up for it. Mm-hmm. And only about a third of those people have actually launched a course. And about another, third of those people have gone to a completion level. And the biggest completion levels we're seeing is certification prep. So for us, it's really telling, like they're charging towards I've got to get my credentials polished up. But the other things that we deemed valuable, whether or not, I just find like I do this all the time. I subscribe to things, courses that are online for free. I never show up. But as soon as I have to put some money down, I'm like, wait a minute, I have some dollars attached to this. I better show up,
Get in the game.
Yeah. But I do think there's a healthy balance. I do think that, if you're doing feature function, in product performance support, self-help type of stuff, absolutely. You don't need to charge for that. I think a company is obligated to give customers access to that stuff. But if it's skills acquisition, if it's deep knowledge, if it's going to be resume impactful, yeah, it's got value associated with it. And that's what helps you climb through from, a novice level user to an industry recognized expert. And I think that's a really important, demarcation in that journey.
Totally agree. I totally agree with you. And you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
One of the oldest phrases in the world. You get what you pay for, right?
Yeah.
There's value. And so if you're paying for something, it's inherently more valuable. And by the way, it's great for the person that's taking it. And again, as we've already discussed, it's great for stickiness and brand loyalty and increasing revenue for our customers.
Yeah.
I think I do see a huge trend in using learning and training content up front before someone buys technology.
Yes.
That free component that you're talking about, we've seen, this is what we're starting to get better at, is tying call it a visitor to a public, call it Adobe. Somebody goes to adobe.com, they start to, if there is some free learning that someone can go consume, we're finding we can tie that to someone that's never bought before. So you can check, you can be like, all right, let's go to our CRM system, whether it's Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or HubSpot, doesn't matter. Go check, like with data, you can check, is this person a customer? Yes or no? Is this person an opportunity? Yes or no?
Well, and it's interesting because you do see some companies creating a wall where you can't get into the learning unless you're a customer.
Yep.
And I feel like that is backwards, right?
Yep.
I totally agree with your point. If you're able to measure how engaged someone is because they've completed X amount of time trying to figure out, will your product do what they need it to do? You don't know if they're in a committee and they're looking and they're writing down compare and contrast between you and your nearest competitor. But I believe I totally agree with you that is a really good indicator that somebody is trying to figure out if their software is right for them. Your software is right for them. So
yeah, Danielle, I feel like we could talk for another hour about this stuff. And I'd love to. So down the road, I'm gonna call on you again because I think this is
sure.
But let's leave with this. So a couple things. Thank you so much for joining.
You're welcome.
It's been an incredible conversation. I hope people have learned and listened quite a bit. I'd encourage people, anybody who's listening, and if they haven't been, where do they find CEdMA? How could they get involved?
Oh, sure. Yeah. CEdMA.org. And we actually have a couple of specials running right now. A couple of things to know about it is we are evaluating a virtual conference because certainly that is one of the big values. But we have special interest groups that range between, best practices in certification, in sales, in curriculum development, all related to technical customer education. So I would encourage everybody to check CEdMA.org out. There's a great video on there that sort of shows one of our conferences and what we do. But yeah, we'd love to have you. It's a group of peers. Lots of great topics, lots of availability to ask questions of your peers and figure out, hey, has anybody done X, Y, or Z? And get a lot of great opinions and information back from everybody. Yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Again, I've gotten a ton of value from attending and speaking with.
Well, and presenting. Yeah, you've been a great presenter for us too. We appreciate that.
Hope to do it again. And so Danielle Campbell, people can find you out on LinkedIn, right? If they want to connect and ask you some questions. Thank you so much. Anywhere else anything else we can promote with Adobe or CEdMA or things you're doing?
No, LinkedIn and CEdMA are the two probably best places for sure. Happy to answer questions and connect with people there for sure.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thank you so much. Danielle Campbell, Adobe, head of global learning strategy. Really, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate the conversation. And let's talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Okay. Thank you very much.